He never expected a single act of kindness to cost him everything. Yet, on that cold, rainy Tuesday morning, when Ethan Carter sprinted across the street to help a trembling girl whose grocery bags had spilled all over the sidewalk, he had no idea that this moment of humanity would collide with the most important job interview of his life. He didn't know that by stopping, he was unknowingly rewriting his future in ways more beautiful and painful than anything he had ever imagined. If you believe kindness is never wasted, that second chances find those who deserve them, and if you support stories that show the power of goodness in a harsh world, make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching this from. The rain had been coming down in violent sheets that morning, beating the pavement as if the sky itself was mourning. Ethan, dressed in his only pressed shirt and borrowed tie, rushed down the street toward the towering glass building where Dalton Enterprises held its interviews. He had prepared for this day for months, studying late into the night, rehearsing answers in the mirror, and reminding himself that this could finally be his breakthrough. Growing up with little, scraping through college on scholarships and part-time jobs, he had carried hope like a fragile flame through every hardship. And today, he believed, the flame might finally grow into something more, but fate stepped in just a few minutes before his appointment. As he passed a narrow side street, he saw a young woman curled on the ground, her hair plastered to her face, her jacket drenched through, and her groceries scattered under the wheels of passing cars. People hurried past, umbrellas angled to protect themselves, eyes focused on their phones, ignoring her as if she didn't exist. Ethan froze for only a second before instinct took over. He knelt beside her, shielding her from the rain with his own body, gathering her items, and helping her to her feet. She looked terrified and embarrassed, apologizing breathlessly, clearly overwhelmed. Her hands were shaking so badly she couldn't even hold the bags. Ethan didn't know who she was. He didn't know her story. He only knew that no decent person would leave her like that. He walked her to a sheltered spot, made sure she wasn't injured, and even helped her find a taxi because she was too rattled to think clearly. By the time he handed her into the car and closed the door, the interview time had already passed. He didn't run toward the building. He didn't make excuses to himself. He simply walked, knowing what he had likely lost but unable to regret the choice he made. When he finally entered the lobby, soaked through and shivering, the receptionist gave him an apologetic look. The panel had moved on. There were no more openings today. They thanked him for coming. They wished him luck. As if it were something he still had. He stepped back outside, rain mixing with the warmth stinging behind his eyes. He felt foolish. Defeated. Like every sacrifice he'd ever made, every step he'd taken toward a better future had just dissolved in the storm. He returned home that evening with heavy shoes, heavier heart, and an even heavier weight on his shoulders. One more setback in a life already filled with them. The next week was long. Lifeless. He applied for small jobs, anything to keep himself afloat, but the one opportunity he had believed in was gone, taken from him because of 10 minutes of kindness. He wondered if he'd been naive. If the world rewarded selfishness instead. Then, 3 days later, he received a call. Dalton Enterprises wanted him back for a second chance interview. He thought it was a mistake. They told him the CEO himself had requested to meet him personally. Confused and nervous, Ethan arrived once again at the towering building, but this time, he was greeted with warmth, ushered into an executive office with a panoramic view of the city. And standing there, by the window, was the girl he had helped in the rain. Her name was Lily Dalton, the daughter of the CEO. And the moment her father entered the room, Ethan understood everything. Lily had told him what happened. How everyone had walked past her that morning except for him. How he had given up something important to help her without expecting anything in return. How that kind of character was what any company should want, especially theirs. The CEO looked at Ethan with deep respect, admitting that no resume could ever show the kind of integrity Ethan displayed that day. They offered him the job on the spot. Ethan accepted it with disbelief swirling through him, gratitude tightening his throat. But more surprising than the job was the connection that slowly built between him and Lily. What began as simple gratitude turned into long conversations, shared laughter, and quiet moments that felt like sparks waiting to become flames. She admired his humility. He admired her sincerity. They saw each other beyond the walls of status or hardship. Still, life wasn't as simple as a fairy tale. Some employees whispered about him, questioning why a young man with a modest background suddenly had access to the executive floor. Some accused him of trying to climb through the CEO's daughter. Ethan felt those eyes, heard those murmurs, and each one cut deep. He worked harder than anyone else, staying late, taking on extra tasks, determined to prove he belonged there through merit, not luck. Lily noticed the strain. She tried to reassure him, tried to tell him that she didn't care about what others thought. But Ethan did. He had grown up fighting to be taken seriously, fighting to show he was more than his circumstances. Now, even with success, he found himself battling the same old insecurities. Then one night, after a particularly draining day, he considered walking away from the company. Not because he couldn't handle the workload, but because he didn't want to be a burden to Lily or her family. He didn't want anyone to think he cared more about opportunity than about her. But Lily found him sitting alone in an empty conference room, staring at the city lights, and quietly sat beside him. She spoke softly, telling him he had changed her life the moment he stopped to help her, telling him she believed he was the kind of person who wouldn't walk away when things became difficult. She reminded him that compassion wasn't weakness, and neither was accepting happiness when it came. Her words settled into him like warmth after a long winter. He stayed. Not just for the job, not just for her, but for himself. For the man he wanted to become. Months passed. His role grew. So did his confidence. And so did their relationship, blooming into something deeper, sturdier, and beautifully unexpected. Ethan realized that the morning he thought ruined his life had actually been the one that transformed it, and as he sat years later, walking through the company as one of its leading executives, with Lily's hand gently in his, he understood that kindness had not cost him the job, it had led him to everything he ever truly needed. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, comment, and subscribe. Your support helps stories like this reach more people around the world. Before we end, let us know in the comments, what act of kindness changed your life, or someone else's.